Okay, let's get started with our study of the Renaissance. This is going to be the first topic that we look at in our exploration of the European world for this unit. All right, so the Renaissance is where we'll begin, and let's start by defining what the Renaissance is. It's essentially a rebirth of art and learning that began in northern Italy around 1300 and then later spread to northern parts of Europe. Okay, so again, it's a rebirth of the classical heritage of ancient Italy, and in this case, sort of ancient Rome. So again, if you can associate the word Renaissance with rebirth, you'll be doing pretty good. Okay, Italy's advantages. First of all, you had urban centers in Italy. For instance, these cities were often places where people exchanged new ideas. In addition, they were ideal breeding grounds for an intellectual revolution. Keep this in mind. When you're looking for some cultural event to go to or some kind of an intellectual activity, you're usually going to go to a city. You might travel to downtown Albany to see a museum. Maybe you'll go down to New York City to see a play, or maybe you'll go down to see the library in New York City. Again, museums, libraries, theater, these are sort of intellectual activities that you often find taking place in urban areas, not so much in the countryside or in rural places. Okay, Italy also had a classical heritage. What that means is that Italian artists and scholars would draw from the inspiration from the ruins of Rome that surrounded them. That's because Rome, in particular, had lots of buildings that had been left over from ancient Rome. And even though it had been almost 1,000 years since anybody had understood what ancient Rome was really all about, the people living there had these constant reminders that ancient Rome was a great place. Its architecture and art was everywhere to be seen. So this inspired many artists in Italy and also scholars to look back at the classical past to figure out, well, what was so great about ancient Rome? So again, when we say that the Renaissance is a rebirth, it's this rebirth and this idea that you've rediscovered your ancient past and you want to learn more about it. And that's exactly what was going on in the Renaissance. Okay, you also have the Medici family. The Medici family are a very powerful family in Italy. Okay, Florence in particular, the city of Florence, came under the rule of the powerful Medici family who made a fortune in trade and banking. In fact, they were also known as the bankers to the popes. And so when the papacy and the pope and the church needed money, they often went to the Medici to help them either get that money, collect that money in terms of taxes, or even borrow loans from them. This made the Medici family very, very powerful, and they were very wealthy as well. But it also created a situation where many powerful families in Italy often competed with each other. So the Medici were just one type of family that competed with many others. Now this is a very famous painting. This is a painting that's in the home of the Lorenzo the Magnificent, one of the most famous Medici. And you can see him riding on the horse down here in the corner of the picture. And then you can also see there's this trail of people that goes all the way back to the back of the screen. Now what those are those are people that basically went to the Medici for help. And in many ways, the Medici would offer them help. They would give them money, they would give them some sort of assistance, but in exchange, the Medici expected those people to help them when they needed it as well. In many ways, this sort of fits the stereotype of what we often think of Italian families and maybe the mafia and the Godfather. Even though those are stereotypes that we see in films today, in fact, Lorenzo and other members of the Medici family were sort of in that position of being sort of godfathers. They looked out for the people that they supported, and they also expected those people to support them when the time came that they asked for that help. And this picture is a really good illustration of that because it shows all the different people that are basically patronizing the Medici and following their rule. Okay, here's a family tree of the Medici family, and you can see it's a pretty complicated tree. Giovanni is the founder of the family. Cosimo de' Medici is one of the more famous of the Medicis. He's the one that made most of the money. Lorenzo, who adopts the power of the family, is very important. It's Lorenzo the Magnificent. He has a brother, Giuliano. And it goes all the way down to where you can see at the bottom here, there's Giovanni and Giuliano down here. And these guys will actually go on to become leaders of the Catholic Church. And in fact, one of them will become the Pope. And actually, he'll be the Pope that's most associated with the Reformation when the Reformation comes, and that's going to be Pope Leo X. Another advantage of Italy's was their merchant class. And as you can see in this picture, Italy had many merchants. They believed that they deserved power and wealth because of their individual merit and achievement. So it's this idea that if you work hard and you're diligent and you do the things that you're supposed to do, the reward will be you'll profit and you'll become wealthy from that. So working hard leads to profit. This is an idea that comes out of the Renaissance. which again was using money as its means for wealth, but again, generating money, making money was certainly the goal of many merchants in Italy at that time. And don't forget that Italy is actually a peninsula, right? So it's an area of land surrounded by water on three sides that sticks out into the Mediterranean Sea. So it was strategically located so they could dominate trade in the Mediterranean world. And that also helped to make the merchant class very wealthy. Okay, so these are all reasons that actually contributed to why Italy had these advantages and why the Renaissance begins in the southern part of Europe in Italy before it spreads to northern Italy. All right, let's take a look at this concept of the Renaissance man. And what that means is that you have an ideal individual who could strive to master almost every area of study. So you could study art, literature, science, math, basically everything. But if you could master all those things and become a master at every part of those areas, then that would in fact make you sort of a Renaissance man. Oftentimes we think of a guy like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo as Renaissance men because they knew everything that they could possibly know. Now in this day and age, that's a little bit tougher to do because we have so much more knowledge to know. It's a little bit more difficult to become a Renaissance man. But in the Renaissance, that time period was an area of new discovery, so they were able to sort of absorb as many different areas of knowledge as they could. All right, so a man who excelled in many fields was praised as a universal man. That's another way of thinking it. A Renaissance man is sort of like a universal man. We also have the concept of a Renaissance woman. In this case, you had upper-class women who basically knew the classics. They could read Latin. They read the classics from ancient Rome. They were well-versed in that school of thought. They were also expected to inspire art, but not create it. So they rarely created it. So women were expected to be well educated, but they weren't expected to be creators of new information. They were expected to sort of, be prepared to be a good wife and know what they were supposed to know, but not engage in business, not engage in artistic or scientific pursuits. They were supposed to be literate, but only to the point that that would help them be a good homemaker. And so it's a little bit different than the concept of a Renaissance man. Okay, let's take a look at this concept of humanism. All right, what is humanism? Now, this is the philosophy that will define the Renaissance and have a lot to do with shaping how people change their attitudes during this time period and help discover this rebirth. First of all, it focused on human potential and achievements. And this is an idea that basically says that people are capable of doing all sorts of things. It's very different than what you might have seen in the Middle Ages, where people sort of attribute everything that was great to God. Right, so there was this religious sort of focus during the Middle Ages on religion and God as sort of the creator of everything. But under humanism, the focus is on human potential and human achievements. So that when people build, let's say, a beautiful Gothic cathedral, it's not God that did it, it's actually humans that achieved that. God may have inspired them, but humans actually created it. It also had to do with understanding ancient Greek values. So again, this is a rediscovery of the ancient Greeks, like people like Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, and people trying to understand that there was a different way to see things, and they were becoming educated, as opposed to the Middle Ages, where people tended to be illiterate and uneducated. Okay, it was also popularized by the study of subjects common to classical education. So people studied history, literature, philosophy. These are all the aspects of humanism that people still sort of participate even in our modern day world. And then it also influenced artists and architects to carry on those classical traditions. So many of the artists that we'll look at, like Michelangelo and Leonardo and Brunelleschi, they are inspired by the classical tradition. And that, again, is a rebirth of the ancient past of both Greece and Rome. Now, I want you to just think about this for a second. Humanism is a very important term to us because you are products of humanism. The public school system in the United States is really focused on teaching these sorts of things, focusing on human achievement, understanding the ancient past, artistic pursuits, the classical traditions, and the fact that today you still study history, literature, philosophy, math and science. These are all aspects of the humanist view of the world. And so that's the philosophy that's come to shape who you are. Your education system is a humanist education system, and it's one that focuses on the classical past, but also looks towards sort of developing or rethinking what the future might be. That's the power of humanism. Very different than what you saw in the Middle Ages, where everything was emphasized on religion and not people. Again, look at the term humanism. It has the word human in it. The emphasis is on us in this world, not, let's say, a god or a deity in the next world. So humanism is a very important philosophy, and it's come to shape American society to a degree that most people probably aren't that familiar with. Again, reading, writing, and arithmetic are aspects of humanism, everything you learn in school. Okay, that's it for now, and we will continue with the Northern Renaissance in the next screencast. Hey, see ya.